I prompt them with questions like, who were your favorite people? Who made you feel loved and taken care of? Who made you laugh? What made you cry? How did you feel about, being away from home? Because I always say, our own experiences as children is probably our best guide. And that goes for parents as well.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. Here on the podcast, I share my experiences raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 16 to 26 and working with thousands more as a summer camp director over the past 3 decades. I'm the author of Happy Campers, and I frequently do workshops with parents, teachers, and summer camp professionals about social skills, connection, and happiness, topics I researched extensively for my master's in psychology. If you want tools for raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults, you've come to the right place. Hey, Sunshine Parenting listeners, and welcome to episode 149. This week's One Simple Thing tip comes from back in episode 133 that I recorded towards the beginning of our sheltering and the beginning of COVID, and it is this. Instead of having really lofty plans for a bunch of new routines and new habits and new family time, just pick one personal routine that you're going to do for your own well-being. If we want to raise kids who become thriving adults, we need to show them what that looks like. And during this time, this very uncertain, stressful time, that looks like us showing them that we are figuring out ways to cope with stressful times that are helpful for our own well-being. Probably the best change that I've made during COVID is prioritizing exercise. I've always enjoyed getting exercise, but I had it kind of low on my priority list, and it often got delayed or canceled because I would get caught up in work. But during this time, I have prioritized getting a little bit of exercise before I start any other projects, and I think that's really helped with my well-being during this time. I've noticed with my kids that they feel a lot better on days that they've gotten some exercise too. So I've been encouraging everyone in the family to at least do something to move their body every single day. This week on the podcast, I'm bringing you my conversation with Stephen Gray Wallace, a repeat guest on the podcast. Stephen's mission as an author, speaker, and consultant is to empower teens and parents to communicate openly about critical issues that young people face, collaborate on the choices they make, and celebrate positive steps they take on the way to becoming happy, healthy, and productive men and women. Stephen has many years of experience as a school psychologist and adolescent counselor. He currently serves as president and director of the Center for Adolescent Research and Education, a national collaborative of institutions and organizations committed to increasing favorable youth outcomes and decreasing negative risk behaviors. In this conversation, Stephen and I talk about his latest book, Impact, an introduction to counseling, mentoring, and youth development. While Stephen's book is specifically geared towards helping camp counselors develop positive relationships with their campers, it is equally applicable to teachers, parents, and anyone else who works with youth. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Stephen Wallace about his book, Impact. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Thanks for having me.
So you're a repeat podcast guest. I think this might be our 3rd conversation. Is that right?
I think it's our 2nd. We did one in Orlando.
Okay.
A few years ago.
Okay. For some reason, I thought we did 2, but maybe we just talked more without having it be a podcast. Anyway, so I'm so excited to have you back here today. And I'd love to talk about your brand new book. And you're going to help me with the subtitle, but the main title is Impact. And what's the subtitle?
An Introduction to Counseling, Mentoring, and Youth Development.
And you were so kind as to send me an advanced digital copy, which I read and really enjoyed. And I even got to write a little blurb for the back. And we saw the book. It's now published, brand new, right?
Yep.
So tell me why, first of all, let's tell listeners a little bit about your background.
Okay, my background is in youth mental health. I'm a school psychologist by training, and I run a national youth and family research collaborative, and you're on my national advisory board.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's called CARE, and CARE stands for?
Center for Adolescent Research and Education. And we're focused in the first instance primarily on favorable youth outcomes, things like positive identity formation and leadership and character development. And in the second instance on reducing risk behavior.
Okay, and you have a lot of great resources on that site as well. So you've been in this whole circling around all different things to do with youth development. You also have a very long history in summer camp, especially working with teens.
Yes.
And teen programs. And so now you've pivoted a little and you have written a book that is something that we both really know is very important, which is about training camp counselors in what they need to know to be successful working with kids over the summer.
That's right. I started my presentation at National Conference last week by stating that I think one of the biggest challenges we face as camp directors is attracting, training, and retaining staff members. And I wanted to really cover that training piece with a comprehensive book that can cover most subjects in their totality for a week-long staff orientation process.
Yeah, so you set up the book. It's not a long read, but it's very specific, and it's set up in so that people could read like a chapter a day for a 5-day orientation period.
That's right.
And then you have some suggested discussion topics, workshops to kind of delve further into the topics. So while it seems like it's kind of a book that has a narrow focus, which is for camp counselors, what I told you before we started recording and what I truly believe after reading it is these things that we teach our camp counselors are equally applicable for coaches, teachers, parents, really anyone who works with kids. And it's almost like if someone who doesn't have a lot of training wants a crash course in child development and working with youth and mentoring kids, your book is a fantastic resource for them.
Yeah, that's the intention. It has a bit of a workbook component to it, so staff can fill things out at the end of each chapter by way of discussion questions, which can be part of an interactive session during a staff orientation week. There's a section at the end called Issue Briefs, which does kind of a deep dive on things like homesickness and bullying and attention deficits and so forth that staff can sort of co-present to each other. So I think it's a good tool. I did staff training for decades at the summer camp where I spent most of my career. And I was always about, having fresh information, fresh data, and finding fun ways to make interactive sessions enjoyable and memorable for the counselors.
Well, I do the same thing. I mean, you know that we kind of have to keep it engaging, these trainings, and you can't just tell people things. They have to sort of experience it and hear it a few different ways so that it really sinks in. One of the things that I'm sure you've found, like I have, is it's kind of daunting when you think about how our camp staff, who are young adults like 19 to 24, 25 years old, they are really expected to behave and lead kids in a way that is better than what parents expect of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, as a parent, you have your good moments with your kids, your not so good moments. Sometimes you're distracted. Sometimes you're not really paying attention. Sometimes you are, but they're with you all the time. So the balance of it generally, hopefully ends up being pretty good. But, when parents hire a babysitter or send their child to camp, their expectation is that these people are going to be positive role models, mentor their kids, be engaged, be attentive, really be those mentors. So it's a big and it's an important job, and it's a really big task that we're asking of these young adults. So what are some of the key ideas? I think you talk a lot about kind of personal growth and kind of the impact that they can have on the kids. What are some of your ideas that you share with counselors in that area?
Well, I think, I wrote a piece for the staff training issue of Camping Magazine coming out in May called A Different Kind of Mentor. And I got the idea from a colleague of mine who lost his 13-year-old son to suicide. And one of the things he said he learned from that experience, and he did a very powerful TED Talk, his name is Jason Reed, was that he's this uber successful businessman and triathlete. And he said he realized in hindsight that he never let his children see his failings or, any, difficulties that he was having. He always sort of presented as, this uber dad and uber businessman and uber athlete. And so that when his son specifically started to face some adversity and was feeling, that he wasn't doing so well, he thought he could have done a better job of letting his children, see the whole person that he is. And that sort of led me down the path of thinking, we talk a lot to staff during orientation week in particular, but also all summer long about being good mentors and being good role models. And the idea that I had was, are we also not providing them an avenue to share appropriate, and that's a key word, obviously, but appropriate information about themselves, things that they might have struggled with, so that the young people who are looking up to them as camp counselors know that it's okay not to be perfect, that it's okay to fail and to learn from it and to bounce back. All the adversity stuff that resilience and adversity stuff that we talk about. So that's certainly a key element in the book as well. I talk a lot and have been for years about the power of presence. And I quote a NPR This I Believe radio segment and book by the same name, or chapter by the same name. And it really talks about the power of just being she says, the quiet understanding of another, just being there, being present, that you don't always have to know the right thing to say or do, but just letting, in this case, your campers know that you care about them. And for directors to make sure that their staff knows that you care about them. It's interesting. There's a section in here that applies management principles to summer camp. And what the data say is the two things that jump off the page in every single study that's been done by this one global management company across all industries related to employee performance are two things. One, when they answer yes to the statement, I believe my manager really cares about me as a person, and yes to, I believe that the work I'm doing is moving the organization forward in a positive direction. And I said to the audience at conference this year, that's something we can do every day. We can remind our counselors and staff that we care about them as people by asking questions that aren't just about their schedule for the day. And also we can let them know that, hey, I saw you teaching tennis today, and that's exactly the direction we want to move our tennis program in. So you're really helping us achieve our goals. Those are simple things we can do as we're managing by wandering around, right?
Well, so much to unpack in what you just said. One of the things that came to mind for me is when you were sharing that tragic story and how sad for that dad and that family that he's taking so much. I mean, first of all, I wish he wouldn't put so much of the burden on himself, because so many of these things are really complicated, and certainly, parents never do anything to intentionally cause any kind of sad outcomes for their kids. But I was thinking with our staff and with us as parents as well, that just thinking up our own challenge or resilience stories it's really good to share with the kids we work with. And so that would actually be a great activity during staff training week. As you prepare to have kids come in, have the counselors think of their own story about something that was, really challenging for them, or something difficult that they overcame that they're comfortable talking about. It could be they had some kind of illness, or they could have, their parents could have gotten divorced, or it could be whatever they're comfortable with. But like you said, kind of being able to share that authentic, imperfect, hey, I'm a human just like you thing with these kids, who many of them are at just the hardest age. That age, like 13 to 18, or maybe even starting younger now. All of our staff, when I ask them, I do this anonymous survey every year, they always say that the majority of them say that was the hardest time for them, or their lowest point in their development, where they just were questioning things and not as sure of themselves. And so here are counselors who are just outside that age, have the opportunity to come in and say to those kids, oh my goodness, when I was 13, this is what I was doing. I was, trying to be friends with these people who really weren't like me. And I was jumping through all these hoops. And then I realized that it just wasn't me. Those kind of stories will really resonate. So I love that focus on, as you say, appropriate. We don't want stories about, drug use and near overdoses, or, early sexual encounters. Those are not appropriate to share with children that you are working with. That's something that parents have the opportunity to talk about as they'd like with their own kids. But we always tell our counselors that those are things that really we need to leave to parents.
Well, and as you know, kids need mentors of all ages, but the close in age mentors are so powerful, because kids really can relate to them, and see themselves in them. And so, I always found that one of the most difficult things during staff orientation with new counselors, assuming if they were returning counselors, they kind of get it, is encouraging or motivating them to buy into the mission, like to embrace that, because we as camp directors all feel that. We're passionate about our mission and our vision and what we're doing for youth, and we can cite chapter and verse what the outcomes are of the summer camp experience based on the American Camp Association's amazing research department. But if you're corralling a group of 18 to 22-year-olds who maybe have never been to a summer camp and saying, this is the most important work you'll ever do in your life, and you can have a huge impact, hence the name of my book, on your campers this summer in enduring ways, that can be a tough sell. But it's so important that we do that. So I have a section in my book about what I call alignment. So alignment to mission, and engagement. So engaging with peers, engaging with the campers, and really doing a great job of being present.
Yeah, that's so important. I think that I remember with our directors, we went to a Disney training about culture, and really kind of it changed a lot of how we spend our time. So we now spend pretty much most of a day just on the why. And it's a very interactive kind of format where we talk about, it's actually the staff, and in each group of staff, like the kitchen staff and the waterfront staff and the counseling staff, they're all given the opportunity to think both as a group and individually, what part of the mission resonates most with them and how they personally are going to work on, that outcome for campers. And it takes a lot of time. And obviously for all of us who've been there before, we've heard this before, but people need ownership, and we can't just skip over that kind of important fundamental thing of the why, of behind all the silly rules and policies and procedures. All this stuff has to have meaning. And as we know, and you were talking again, I think before we started recording, about this is the staff we're working with now, they have been taught to ask why, to inquire about the reason behind things, and not just to do things because they're asked. Right. And so it falls to us as their supervisors to make sure they know what they're doing, and why, and the why behind what they're doing.
Yeah. And I think a great way to do that, or to start that process, is during the interviewing phase, and asking, open-ended questions. And the trade is called motivational interviewing. And so if we ask our staff, our prospective staff, so what type of difference would you like to make in your campers' lives this summer? We can use that as data so that when they get there, we can regurgitate back to them what they and their peers said about that. And I think, as you said, then it becomes part of that old management principle that people tend to support what they help to create. And so if they see an intentional approach to running the summer camp in a way that reflects what they themselves are trying to do, I think it's much more salient.
So I want to bring this conversation kind of back to parents a little bit, because even what you just said, I feel like that's an exercise that parents can do as well. I mean, to sit back and say, well, what is my why? Like, what is the outcome that I want for my own child? And remembering that can help us with the actual activities we do, the things, the way we spend our time, all of that kind of stuff. So I wanted you to also, I know you're really focused on this book as for counselors, but I just know many of my listeners, maybe they're not camp counselors. They might be parents sending their kids to camp.
Mm-hmm.
But the information that you research and study and share in this book is really for all people who work with kids. So what are some of your other kind of tips or advice that you share about just what it takes to be a really positive mentor? What are some of the practices or things that you really try to train counselors to do to be that really positive influence on kids?
Well, there's a whole section in the book that talks about expectations. So the expectations that parents have, as you pointed out, and I give real life examples from my own work with parents. And what are the kids' expectations? And the kids' expectations are usually much simpler than the parent expectations, understandably so, depending on the age of the child. But they tend to say things like, I want to have fun, I want to make new friends, and I want to get my silver bow archer or something like that. Parents obviously have a much more granular list of expectations, and we know what they are. They're health, safety, fun, personal development, and each of those is a mile deep. And one of the things that I used to run these wellness seminars with one of the nurse practitioners, and we would meet with staff by age group, and we'd go over sort of the physiological, psychological needs of that particular age group. And, reminding them that in many ways, they're going to be parents for the summer, and they may find themselves saying things, words coming out of their mouth, and think, oh my God, I sound just like my mother. And we say, that's a good thing. Like if you're saying to your camper, gee, I think you ought to, have a vegetable with your dinner. How about some peas? I used to say, give peas a chance. And of course, the kids didn't get it, but the staff thought it was hilarious. Make sure you brush your teeth, especially for the younger campers. And so really transitioning from, as we like to say, for the typical college counselor, camp counselor, maybe in college or heading to college, where most of the year they're focused on bettering themselves. Now their job is to focus on bettering someone else's children.
Yeah, that's so good. It's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking this month I've been kind of focused on really digging into what kids are capable of. One chapter of my book is, kids are more capable than parents think they are, in that there's a lot of things that we kind of hold our kids back from doing. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how that knowledge, that information that you pass along to your staff about like the characteristics, the physical, emotional, social, all that stuff, characteristics of kids, that information is really valuable. I have like a chart that we give our counselors, and that information, parents really need that. I'll put a link in the show notes to this episode, because I think, as parents, even parents who work with, like, say they're a high school teacher, for example, they have a lot of experience with that age group, but then their kids go through all the different age groups, getting up to that point. So I think it's really, it's great for parents as well as camp counselors and anyone who works with kids to be familiar with what's a normal expectation. And obviously some kids are outliers for one reason or another, but you can kind of make some generalizations that, kids who are 7 generally need to be reminded to brush their teeth. Something like that. Whereas by the time they're a 17-year-old, junior counselor or counselor in training, they should be able to remember to brush their own teeth. And if they don't, that's something that they need to learn. And so it's like thinking through these things as a parent, I'm really finding that we need to remind ourselves a lot more as parents than when we're working with other people's kids, because as parents, we see our kids sort of as they were
Yeah.
and not as they are. We remember them being very small. We also kind of know their weaknesses so well that sometimes we can underestimate their abilities based on maybe they're disorganized. So we kind of translate that into other areas. So I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, to your point about the book being equally applicable for parents or teachers or coaches or whomever, one of the questions I was asked after my presentation last week was, "What's your favorite staff training exercise?" And hands down, it's a guided imagery session that I do on child development. And so I lead them through it. I lead them through relaxation exercises, and then I sort of have them image in their head going back in time to the age that they were that match up with their camper's age. And I prompt them with questions like, who were your favorite people? Who made you feel loved and taken care of? Who made you laugh? What made you cry? How did you feel about being away from home? Because I always say, our own experiences as children is probably our best guide, and that goes for parents as well. And yeah, we may be dating ourselves a little bit, but a lot of the basic human reactions at different ages can really be mile markers for us to keep in mind when we're working with kids.
Oh my gosh, I would think as a parent too, that our own kids would love to hear our answers to those questions.
Yeah.
Like, like if you were telling them, oh my gosh, when I was 12, I used to spend, hours with these two friends. We had a little club and we had this, like all these notes and all this stuff going on. So it's like to share with them. Again, that's almost like back to that authenticity piece that we talked about at the beginning, that it kind of shares with them like, hey, I wasn't always this like adult who had a job and drove my car and did all these responsible things. I was once, 11, and I used to play more and probably was a lot more fun back then.
Those would be great dinner time conversations.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. But that is a super powerful activity that you do with staff, and also really goes back to that mission and the why. When they envision themselves as that age and they think about the adult who was a positive impact on them, that's going to help them start thinking, well, that's the adult I want to be for my kids. I want to be that person who, when they're doing their imagery, they're remembering me. I want to be that.
And I have staff that come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh my God, I remembered people I hadn't thought of in 10 years,
Oh, isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, we need to kind of wrap this up, but one of the things that I know that you have just vast amounts of ideas and resources. Every time we talk, you tell me more and more things, that books I need to read, things I need to research. So what are a few of your kind of current favorite resources, books that you've read recently, or websites, or people, whatever, that you've accessed that you think parents might find helpful?
I'm currently about halfway through a book by Mark Perna called Answering Why. And you touched on this, but he lumps together the millennial generation with Generation Z and calls them the Why generation, because they share that question, like, why do I have to do this? Or why do we do things this way? And I think it's good. I know you said it can seem disrespectful, but I like to look at it as they're looking to buy in, and I think they are very much so. They really want to be a part of our organizations or our families, and when they ask us why, it gives us the opportunity to share really important information for them to learn. So that's really good. I just ordered The Teenage Brain by Frances Jensen, which is always interesting to read about the latest research in adolescent brain development. And in advance of publishing a piece on Valentine's Day called Better Love, which is actually based on the work of the Yardley Love Foundation, One Love, after Yardley Love, who is the college student who was assaulted by her sometime boyfriend and college athlete and killed. I bought a book called Boys and Sex, which is subtitled Young Men on Hookups, Love, Porn, Consent, and Navigating the New Masculinity. So that's by Peggy Orenstein, who has a great piece in Vanity Fair, I think it is, this month, on how we're raising our boys, which is, for a very interesting topic for me. So those are my current reads, but there's more on the way. So
right. You have a stack as large as mine, which I appreciate.
Pretty soon I won't need a bedside table. They'll be stacked up so high I can put my water on the top of
Yeah, you save money on furniture by just using books as every piece of furniture. That's great. Well, Stephen, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed getting a chance to read Impact and just appreciate your work in general. You're just out there in the trenches, researching, sharing important information, keeping up with all the trends and sharing that with the rest of us. So where can people find you to get on your email list and learn more about you?
So my website is Stephen, Stephen Gray, Gray, Wallace, WALLACE.com. And you can message me on that, and I'll always get back to people that have questions or looking for resources or information.
Thanks so much for being on again. It's been really awesome talking to you.
Thanks, Audrey. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Stephen about his book, Impact. If you're interested in listening to our other conversations, you can check out episode 27, where we talked about raising teens who thrive, or episode 92 about creating strong relationships with teens. My favorite this week is a colorful, user-friendly workbook by Katie Hurley, LCSW. It's called The Depression Workbook for Teens: Tools to Improve Your Mood, Build Self-Esteem, and Stay Motivated. I really like how Katie's workbook is designed for the teens themselves. It's very user-friendly and offers just simple exercises and ideas to help them figure out their own best coping strategies. There's a whole section of the workbook that are exercises to improve mood, build self-esteem, and stay motivated. I'll put a link in the show notes to where you can find out more about the workbook, but I definitely encourage you to check it out if you are parenting teens or you work with them in any setting. As always, you can find notes, links, and other resources related to today's conversation by visiting my website at sunshine-parenting.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for my email list so that you don't miss out on any of the great resources I have available for raising thriving kids. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate you sharing it with a friend. Please take a moment to give Sunshine Parenting a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Let's end with a quote from my book, Happy Campers. Creating a close and connected family culture that promotes positive, lifelong relationships is the most important thing we can do for our children. Warm and supportive parent-child relationships, a sense of being loved, and help and support from family members serve as protective factors and increase children's resilience and their ability to face many of life's inevitable challenges. I'm Audrey Monkey. Thank you for joining me for the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. Join me again next week for more conversations about raising kids who become thriving adults.